Welcome to another interview in our FM Expert series. Today I'm joined by Bernard Crouch. Hi Bernard, how are you? Good to see you.
Hi, I'm fine, thank you.
Bernard is the director at Acumen FM, and Bernard, you're going to be sharing some of your thoughts and insight around the recording, tracking and managing of key building information. Now that's a huge subject, but I know you're going to give us some insight, so I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you. So I'm now going to slightly contradict myself by having said that's what we're going to be talking about, and just say that it's really important that all of us in the industry remember that actually what it's all about is people.
Yeah.
So yes, I'm going to talk about assets and buildings and bits of kit that keep buildings running and how we should record and track those and so on. But realistically, let's not forget that it is actually about people, and that's who we're dealing with. And when someone isn't happy in the office because they're too hot or too cold,
yep,
or the cleaner doesn't, they don't think the cleaner cleans their particular bit as often or properly as they should, then that's just really important to them.
Yeah.
So I've covered that bit off. Yeah, so I regularly work with clients both in the UK and sometimes abroad, and a very common instance that I come across is a failure to have a proper list of assets.
Yep.
And this is it's really a big issue when I'm coming into a contract, regardless of what type of work I might be doing there. So if I'm coming to do procurement, for instance, then the incoming companies looking to tender would like, they want to know what there is and where is it and so on. And that could be as simple as having buildings spread across the country and not actually having sufficient data on those buildings, or it might just be one office block and yet for whatever reason there's no record, or there's no accurate record of what they're going to find in that building. And to give you, for example, for instance, I've gone back to a client and said, well, actually, I've gone round this building of yours, and I keep seeing all these barcodes with a very well-known FM company's name there. There's a barcode on this and a barcode. There's a barcode on the fridge. There's a barcode on the CCTV. There's everything I look at has got a barcode on it. I'm really pleased to see this. Can I see the asset register that you didn't seem to be very keen to show me? Well, when they lost the contract about a year ago, that was it. We've never seen it since. So we don't have an asset register. We've kind of lost it, in as much that the contractor walked off with it.
Yeah.
And possibly the contractors then come back and said, yeah, you can have the asset register, but it'll cost you X £1,000. I've heard that as well. So obviously the client's going to say, no, I'm not. I'm sorry, I'm not. You've just lost the contract because you weren't very good. Why would I pay you the money to have something that should have been mine in the first place? So one of the points I'm making there is that when you're letting a contract, especially for hard services, you really want to make sure that if an asset register doesn't exist and the contractor's going to create that remains, that's in the T's and C's, that is something that remains with the company. It doesn't belong to the contractor, it belongs to the
so it's the client's IP.
Client, so it belongs to the client.
Yeah. Okay.
So I particularly stress that. And then secondly, obviously, it also needs to be kept up, should be recorded, that's kept up to date. Yeah. So if in, I don't know, maybe it's a 3+2, so in 5 years' time, they lose the contract, someone else comes in. What you also don't want is an asset register that's frozen from 5 years ago. And when you send, a new contractor comes in and says, well, we went to fix that boiler, and it's not a it's not a hand-worthy boiler. And you're looking, well, how did that happen? Well, it's because actually we swapped it out 2 years ago, and the asset register hasn't been kept up to date. And I guess tied in with that, particularly on bigger sites or on contracts or clients where there's a multitude of buildings, or perhaps a campus site, is having very accurate location data tied to the assets as well.
Yeah.
Because I've also had that issue where I've been on a site, contractors come in to fix something, we get a message back, they've been to see it, they couldn't really find a genuine fault. It was working fine when they left, and then the following day we discover that actually they were in the wrong building,
exactly, yeah,
wrong floor, or in the wrong plant room, and you can see how easily that can come about if you haven't actually got that data properly recorded somewhere. So you end up with a completely wasted visit. You've got end users who are unhappy because you told them the engineer was coming in, and then you've actually told them it's been fixed, and they quite rightly say no, it hasn't.
Which could be really dangerous, couldn't it? If it's a bit.
It could be really dangerous, yes. And I can't tell you. That's happened more times than I care to remember.
Yeah.
Where they've either turned up at the wrong building or the wrong plant room or the wrong floor, or and it could even be there's one bit of kit they're facing each other and they're actually working on the wrong one, and it's this one over here. But the problem is, if you haven't got sufficient data about everything you've got in the building, then it's entirely feasible for someone to come in and fix the wrong thing or try to.
So I think one of the questions that people are often asked about asset registers are, what fields of information should we keep about that asset? What data? So if you think of a table with headings, what key information would you keep? So you've talked about location. Well, I'd
want the make. I want the make of whatever it was, and a model number, a serial number, and yes, indeed, of course, very obviously, the location.
Yeah.
And then it certainly wouldn't harm to have, either the installation date or the age of the piece of kit, and possibly you could start looking at life cycle planning and have possible expiry date on it as on the field as well. So you're then starting to have something that's a lot more useful than just a. And
I guess that some pieces of kit, you might have things like the safe working load. You might capture, I mean, it depends on the detail. You might want to capture the further examination dates if you're keeping it that live. And what about photos? Because people have mixed thoughts about photos. Do you like photos on asset registers, or is it not?
Well, I do for the reason I just mentioned earlier, and that helps to avoid the sending someone or having someone going off and fixing or attempting to fix the wrong item. Yeah. So personally, I like photos. I mean, a good quality colour photo, I think, is really valuable. I do understand why there might be some people who are not keen, obviously, but I think that's a great way to do it. And I have a client who I worked with 26 sites across the UK, and that's what we actually did. We went around every single site and took a photo of everything. Yeah. And that's what they now have. And fingers crossed, their contractor is keeping that up to date. And when they refurbish a building or replace a bit of kit, they take a fresh picture and record all the fresh details there. So the management of it is important, because that's what I also find is that, having just said that there are, obviously I quite often come across instances where perhaps there isn't an asset register. There's also asset registers that have lapsed, have fallen behind, or out of date. Yeah. And yes, if you're sending someone in and telling them this information, and then they turn up ready to work on something that's actually been replaced. Yeah. And that in itself is it's time confusing. It causes confusion, and it doesn't. I mean, it looks very unprofessional, doesn't it? You're sending an engineer to work on something. When they get there, it's not a day kin after all. We actually took that out 2 years ago, and they're instead of being prepared, they're not. They're unprepared because it's something else that's there. So those would be my sort of major bits of advice around assets and asset management. And the procurement related element of that. I think one of the other things I'd like to say for especially, and I always mention this when I'm doing tutoring, because most of the people who are coming along to do level 4, level 5 are they're relatively, they're not new into the industry, but relatively new. I personally am a big believer of walking sites and not hiding away in the FM office somewhere, which is very easy to do, and look at the BMS and look at the CCTV, and you kind of think you're seeing, well, I can see what's going on because I've got it all coming up on these two screens over here. I'm actually looking at two screens now, just to my left, where I can, I can get a feel for what's going on. But the reality is, when I walk around, or advising anyone else in FM to walk around, is that you are actually, you engage with people that you see while you're going around. They get to know who you are and what you do and why you're there. And I really don't mind that. I don't mind if someone wants to hassle me every time they see me about some problem that they've got, because hopefully that can be fixed, and hopefully we're delivering a better service and making FM, raising the profile of FM, which is a big, one of my big bones of contention, is that after all these years, you still bump into, or you're chatting to some stranger and they ask you what you do and you say facility management and they say, what's that? I struggle with that, and I just think if more of us spoke to more of the people in our buildings more often, then they might get a better idea that it's of what we do, and then perhaps a little bit of the scope of what we do. So we're not just there to provide cleaning services and a security guard at front entrance.
But I mean, it sounds like we share a similar thought process on this, and I think that when I have FM say to me, "Oh, people don't really understand what I do, and they don't see the importance of my role," I say, "Well, that's your fault, fundamentally, because why should your client understand it unless you explain to them what you do and you articulate the absolute importance of the role and some of the key strategic, some of the business critical things that you're looking after? Why would people understand it if we don't explain them? We don't explain it. It's up to us. Do you not think, as a starting point?"
Totally. I mean, there's two elements to that. So if I'm working on something like business continuity, that's the sort of thing that a lot of people would, and clients as well, who wouldn't really think that was part of necessarily what we do. And the second point is that I tend to find myself, and I'm sure I'm not alone in this, but because I'm working with different clients, I quite often come into a new build project somewhat late in the day. But then I might find that the actual client themselves, head of FM or whoever, has also not been really that involved from the beginning. And then, of course, we're going to moan about what the architects have delivered, but because we weren't there day one, because we weren't involved in saying, well, actually, one cleaner's cover for the whole building with no power and no water in it, no butler sink isn't sufficient. Or how on earth is anyone ever going to get up there? You haven't actually. We need to get on the roof from time to time. You haven't somehow or another, don't seem to factor that in. Or we're never going to be able to clean that bit of glass up there. That's impossible. That just makes such a difference. And when there's that opportunity, again, this is I suppose it's an obvious thing to say, but a tip, if you like, for anyone working in the industry, and particularly as they get promoted or get a more responsible position, is to push really hard to make sure they're part of that design team from very early on. And challenge. Don't be afraid to challenge. I have friends who are architects. They're lovely people.
But they have different priorities. And
I always say nice things about them. But
as you were saying your list of frustrations, I was smiling and nodding because I've had exactly the same thing. And I think we both agree they've got, FMs have got to have a seat at that table and have a voice in how the building is being designed and spec'd, because they are the people who understand how it works and how it functions, And
I'm saying to them, that's south facing, that whole, that's all south facing, that side of the building there. And you don't seem to have considered that. So I'm looking at the layouts you're doing in the building, and you don't, we need to actually think about, we can't just have yet another building that's going to be too hot in the summer with too much sunlight coming in and perhaps too cold in the winter, and all the sort of issues and challenges that we get.
And that all comes to raising profile, doesn't it? Listen, I'm conscious of time because we're about 15 minutes, and I knew time would fly like that. But you've given us some really useful content, and I think people will find this conversation very useful, Bernard. So thank you for sharing your time, and I think particularly because you do tutoring, you've got your experience with the chair of the Risings committee with IWFM, and then from the consultancy point of view, like you say, you go into so many different clients, so you've got this sort of unique perspective. So thank you for sharing your time and your expertise. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.